So now I'm going to show you how to make a bar graph with data that is scale or interval. So when you want a graph that shows you the average value in a particular condition or for a particular group of people. So I've got the age, word, rep data up, so my adults and older adults and their word and non-word repetition scores. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the name of these variables to something very, very simple to how I want it to appear in the graph. So word, non-word, because SPSS will use the values that you put into the column and row labels to generate the graph. So first we go graphs, legacy dialog, bar. I want a bar graph. Now I want the data to be grouped, so I want the word and non-word scores for the adults to be next to each other and the word and non-word scores for the older adults to be next to each other, so I pick clustered. I also want SPSS to average across the word and non-word data, so I'm choosing summaries of separate variables, so the word and the non-word data are in separate variables, and then I click define. So first of all you put what the bars represent, so word, non-word. So you can see that it's automatically selected the mean, so the numerical average. I could change that. I could change it to the median or the mode, or I could have the standard deviation, but I want the average, so I'm going to leave it at its default setting. I then also want it to separate the groups, the adults and the older adults, so I stick that in category axis, so across the bottom you'll have adults and older adults. And then we go to options. So I want it to have error bars. So whenever you have a graph that's displaying the average of a group of data, you want it to have error bars to show you the variation around that average. So that's what an error bar does. It tells you how big is the range around that average value that you can see on the graph. So the variation might be very small, in which case everybody has quite similar values, or the variation could be very big, in which case different people have very different values. So you can have confidence intervals, standard error, or the standard deviation. So we're going to stick with the standard deviation. So what's the average value by which everybody varies from the mean of the data? And we're going to have bar graphs that represent plus or minus 2 standard deviations. So this will tell us where most of the people lie, where about 95% of the data lies, in between the values within the error bars. So we'll show you that on the graph. So here we go. Continue and OK. So SPSS chugs away. And here's my graph. So first of all I'm going to give it a title just so I remember what it actually is. And there we go. And then we can double click on the graph itself and bring up the chart editor. So you can see I've got group there. It's got a little notation to tell me that the error bars are plus or minus 2 standard deviations from the mean. This group isn't very informative, so I want to edit that. I'm going to call it age group. And mean here, that's not informative at all, so I definitely want to edit that. So actually what I'm seeing is the average score on the repetition task, or rather the average score on the repetition task. That'll do. And then you can see that blue is for words and green is for non-words. So you can move the I think you can move the legend around if it'll let me highlight it. There we go. So I could stick it inside the graph just to make things a bit neater. And here are my error bars. So I've got the average value here. So adults scored about the same when repeating words and non-words, and about 95% of the data is within this range around that average value. So 2 standard deviations. And then the older adults, you can see that overall actually they had a lower score compared to the adults. And again, for the older adults, about 60% correct with words and non-words, and then 95% of the data from the older adults will fall within this range around the average value. So there we go, a nice bar graph with the average values and error bars.